Hi friends, welcome to the infectious disease series on the channel, and in this lecture we will discuss mucormycosis. We will see introduction, then what is the etiology and pathogenesis of mucormycosis, what all clinical manifestations can occur like rhino-orbital cerebral disease, pulmonary disease, cutaneous disease, gastrointestinal and disseminated and miscellaneous forms. How to diagnose this condition, what all are the differential diagnosis, treatment, and finally what is the prognosis of the disease. So guys, first of all, mucormycosis represents a group of life-threatening fungal infections which usually have a highly invasive and progressive course, which is responsible for the high mortality of this condition. The mortality can be 40% to 90% in certain types of mucormycosis. So what is the etiology? It is caused by order Mucorales of the subphylum Mucormycotina. This was formerly known as Zygomycetes. Now this order Mucorales is divided into 7 families, which we will see later in the slides. All of these can lead to mucormycosis. So who are the at-risk individuals who are at risk for developing mucormycosis? These are the patients of diabetes mellitus, solid organ or hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, immunocompromised individuals, prolonged neutropenia, individuals with malignancy, and who are taking prophylactic antibiotics and antifungals. Now the individuals with diabetes mellitus can be either previously diagnosed or newly diagnosed individuals. Also, mucormycosis may be the first clinical presentation of diabetes mellitus. These individuals usually have history of glucocorticoid use. Now, when we consider hematopoietic stem cell transplantation individuals, mucormycosis can be seen in these individuals both in neutropenic or non-neutropenic cases, which is equally in both types of individuals. What is the etiology in non-neutropenic patients? Because these non-neutropenic patients are on steroids to avoid graft versus host disease. So these steroids will lead to immunocompromised state leading to mucormycosis. Now when we consider the prophylactic antifungals, the individuals who are taking prophylactic itraconazole or voriconazole are at risk for developing disseminated mucormycosis. On the other hand, the individuals who are taking prophylactic posaconazole or echinocandins are at risk of developing breakthrough mucormycosis. Now, it is important to note that in addition to all these at-risk individuals, mucormycosis can also develop in immunocompetent individuals. This usually occurs by traumatic implantation of soil or vegetation containing this fungus or nosocomial infection like IV cannula, subcutaneous injections or ET tubes, etc. Now coming on to the etiology, the order Mucorales is divided into 7 families as we have already discussed. These are the following as you can see on the screen. So all of these fungus can lead to mucormycosis, but when we consider the most common causes, the family Mucoraceae is responsible for the most of the cases. So Rhizopus oryzae and Rhizopus delimar, these are the most common cause in Western world. But when we consider the cause in India, the major cause in India is fungus of family Saxinaceae, that is Apophysomyces elegans. This is the major cause in India. Other fungus which can cause mucormycosis can be Rhizopus microsporus, Rhizomucor, Mucor, Actinomucor, Lichthemia, and it is important to note that fungus Cunninghamilla can lead to mucormycosis in immunocompromised individuals. Immunocompromised Now coming on to the pathogenesis, mucorales are ubiquitous environmental fungus to which humans are constantly exposed. It infects primarily the diabetics, individuals of diabetic ketoacidosis, immunocompromised individuals, and the persons having elevated free iron. Now in diabetics and DKA, the major type which is seen in rhinocerebral mucormycosis. What happens is in DKA there is a combination of acidosis along with ketosis. Now the acidosis leads to dissociation of iron from the sequestering protein. This iron is responsible for the increased fungal survival and virulence. On the other hand, the ketone body, primarily beta hydroxybutyrate, increases the expression of host and fungal receptors, which lead to increased fungal adherence and penetration into the host tissue. Now the immunocompromised individuals include the individuals who have defects in phagocytic function like neutropenia or taking steroids. Elevated free iron supports fungal growth. Now it is important to note that in diabetics, the patients have hyperglycemia. Even in the absence of DKA, that is, even in the absence of acidosis, there is increased risk of mucormycosis. How? By these four mechanisms. First of all, there is hyperglycation of iron sequestering proteins, which increases the free iron, which supports the fungal growth. Secondly, there is upregulation of mammalian cell receptor GRP78. This upregulation is due to hyperglycemia and increased free iron. This receptor is responsible for binding to the fungus mucorales, and this enables the fungus to penetrate the tissues of the host. Also, there is defect in phagocytic function, and finally enhanced expression of COT-H. This COT-H is a mucorale specific protein which binds to the GRP78 receptor in the host and leads to host cell invasion of the fungus. Now coming on to the clinical manifestations, mucormycosis can be divided into following clinical syndromes. There can be rhino-orbital cerebral disease, pulmonary disease, cutaneous disease, gastrointestinal, and finally disseminated and miscellaneous forms. So let's discuss all these manifestations one by one. First, let's discuss rhino-orbital cerebral disease. So rhino-orbital cerebral disease is the most common type of mucormycosis. It is usually seen in diabetics and individuals having DKA. The clinical condition progresses from eye pain, facial pain, numbness, blurry vision. This can spread to ethmoid sinus involving orbit. When it involves the orbit, there is compromise of extraocular muscles and there is proptosis associated with chemosis. Finally, it can spread to frontal lobe and the cavernous sinus. When it spreads to cavernous sinus, there is involvement of contralateral eye with the same clinical features. So it is very important to identify this condition earlier in this stage of eye pain, facial pain, numbness, because if left untreated, it can reach ethmoid sinus, then orbit, then frontal lobe and cavernous sinus. On examination, earlier there is normal tissue in the early stages, then there is starting of erythematous phase which can be present with or without edema, then there is violaceous appearance, and finally leading to black necrotic scar. The progression can range from rapid to very slow, that is from few days to months to years, and this progression depends upon the immune status of the patient and the causative mucorale species. Now coming on to second type, that is pulmonary disease. It is the second most common type of mucormycosis in which the patient presents with dyspnea, cough, chest pain. By angioinvasion, the disease can lead to necrosis, cavitation, and can present with hemoptysis. On radiography, particularly HRCT thorax, there can be lobar consolidation, isolated masses, nodular pattern, cavities, or wedge-shaped infarcts. Now, it is very important to note that in patients of cancer, it is very difficult to differentiate mucormycosis from aspergillosis. But it is important to differentiate both these conditions because the treatment of aspergillosis, like drugs like voriconazole, can exacerbate the mucormycosis if it is missed. So, the features which are characteristic of mucormycosis are more than equal to 10 pulmonary nodules, pleural effusion, and concomitant sinusitis. So these are the features which will be present in mucormycosis and can be used to differentiate it from aspergillosis. Now coming on to the cutaneous disease, it can be seen in immunocompetent individuals. It can either be by external implantation of fungus or by hematogenous dissemination. By external implantation, it can occur through soil exposure, for example, in trauma like natural disaster or road traffic accident. It can also enter the body by penetrating injury with plant material like thorn, and nosocomial infections like injection catheter and endotracheal tube. It can also be there by hematogenous spread. It is important to note that it can be highly invasive, involving muscle, fascia, and bone, and the necrotizing fasciitis can have mortality up to 90% mortality rate. When we consider the treatment for the cutaneous disease is surgical debridement, and if it is done at time, the disease usually has a favorable prognosis. Now, when we consider the gastrointestinal disease, it is usually seen in immunocompromised individuals. The patients usually present with abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting. On endoscopy, we can see a fungating mass, and it can complicate into GI bleeding or visceral perforation. Now coming on to the last type, that is disseminated type and miscellaneous forms. Dissemination can occur most commonly through hematogenous route, and it can occur from any primary site of infection. So the most common site of dissemination is brain, but dissemination can occur to other sites like bones, mediastinum, trachea, kidney, peritoneum, etc. Mortality is very high, up to 90%. Now coming on to the diagnosis, there should be a high index of suspicion when any case of mucormycosis is expected. There is definitive diagnosis and probable diagnosis. The definitive diagnosis is positive culture from sterile sites like needle aspirate, tissue biopsy specimen, or pleural fluid, or histopathological evidence of invasive mucormycosis. If any of these present, then it will be definitive diagnosis of mucormycosis. Now when we consider the probable diagnosis, it is defined by culture from a non-sterile site like sputum or bronchoalveolar lavage fluid, or there can be detection of mucorales on the surface of histopathological sample without an evidence of invasion in a patient who has appropriate risk factors, clinical features, and radiological findings suggestive of the disease. Now biopsy with histopathological examination is most sensitive and specific investigation, most specific as well as sensitive investigation. In mucormycosis, we can see hyphae which are wide, almost 6 to 30 micron in size. These are aseptate hyphae which branch at right angles. Now the stains which are used are periodic acidic Schiff stain and hemoxylin and eosin stain, which can be used to diagnose mucormycosis. On the other hand, other fungus are usually stained by methenamine silver stain. Now these features can be used to differentiate it from Aspergillus fusarium pseudosporium, which have septa which are thinner and branch at acute angles. But the most reliable feature is wide ribbon like hyphae, because the aseptate hyphae can be septate or branch at different angles during the processing. That is, these are altered during the processing. PCR can be used, but it is not approved by US FDA. Not approved by US FDA. Culture can be done, but it is present only in less than 50% of cases. Why? Because the fungus is killed during the processing. Therefore, during the processing, it should not be homogenized. The fungus is killed during homogenization during the processing of the tissue sample. Imaging can be useful, and the most important investigation is MRI, but these usually show non-specific finding like sinusitis. Endoscopy or surgical exploration should be done in high-risk individuals with biopsy of suspected areas of infection. So endoscopy or surgical exploration with biopsy can be done. Now, when we consider the differential diagnosis of mucormycosis, other mold infections like aspergillosis, pseudosporiosis, fusariosis, and diatomaceous fungus, which is also known as brown pigmented soil fungus, these all can produce clinical syndromes which are identical to mucormycosis. But their differentiation is very important, and these can be done on H&E staining on histopathological specimens. And it is also important because the antifungals used for these fungus can be very harmful if used in mucormycosis. Other differential is entomophthalmomycosis, which is caused by Basidio-bolus and Conidio-bolus. These also cause identical clinical syndromes to mucormycosis. Bacterial pathogens like Staph aureus, Streptococcus can produce sinusitis, proptosis, orbital cellulitis, and cavernous sinus thrombosis, which is also seen as mucormycosis. Klebsiella rhinoscleromatis can lead to rhinoscleroma, which can also be a differential diagnosis of mucormycosis. Lastly, a syndrome known as Tolosa-Hunt syndrome is also a differential diagnosis in which there is non-specific inflammation leading to painful ophthalmoplegia, headache, ptosis, and cavernous sinus inflammation. But it is different because there is lack of progression of this disease. It is a static disease without any progression. Now coming on to the most important part, that is treatment. The three principles of treatment are early initiation of therapy, rapid reversal of underlying predisposing risk factors, and surgical debridement whenever possible. So therapy must be started empirically before the diagnosis is established. So empirical therapy has a very important role in mucormycosis, since the disease can be subtle initially and the confirmation of diagnosis can take several days. So the risk factors should be avoided, like steroids should be avoided and tapered whenever possible. Blood sugar should be controlled, and we should restore euglycemia and normal acid-base status. We have to avoid iron administration and blood administration because these can lead to increased iron and increased fungal survival. Surgical debridement whenever possible should be done because in mucormycosis there is blood vessel thrombosis and tissue necrosis. So surgical debridement can open these blood vessels and remove the necrosed tissue, which is the focus of the infection. It therefore increases the vascularity. Now coming on to the antifungals, primarily the treatment of mucormycosis is done by polyenes, which are the first line antifungals. These include amphotericin B deoxycholate, liposomal amphotericin B, and amphotericin B lipid complex. So first discuss amphotericin B deoxycholate. It is highly nephrotoxic. Therefore, a dose of 1 to 1.5 milligram per kg once per day can be given. It has poor CNS penetration, cannot be given in CNS mucormycosis, but this is inexpensive. On the other hand, both liposomal amphotericin B and amphotericin B lipid complex are less nephrotoxic, out of which the least nephrotoxic is liposomal amphotericin B. Therefore, we can give a dose of 5 to 10 milligram per kg once per day. It has a better CNS penetration than amphotericin B deoxycholate or lipid complex amphotericin B, and doses of 10 milligram per kg should only be given if there is CNS involvement. But all this comes at a cost, and this antifungal is very expensive. On the other hand, amphotericin B lipid complex should be given at a dose of 5 mg per kg once per day. It is less nephrotoxic than deoxycholate but more than liposomal. It is also expensive, and it is less efficacious than liposomal amphotericin B for CNS infection. So drug of choice for CNS infection is liposomal amphotericin B, and in general it is the drug of choice because it is less toxic and can penetrate CNS better. Now usually azoles cannot be given in mucormycosis, but two azoles are FDA approved for mucormycosis, which are isavuconazole and posaconazole. When we consider isavuconazole, the dose is 200 mg for TDS for 6 doses followed by once daily dosing. Efficacy is similar to liposomal amphotericin B only in mouse models. It is FDA approved, but it has very less clinical experience, and it can be given when we are not sure whether the infection is by septate mold versus mucormycosis. So it will cover both mucormycosis and septate molds like Aspergillus. So these can be given in these cases. Isavuconazole is given in a dose of 200 mg 4 times per day, and it has lower minimal inhibitory concentration than isavuconazole. It can be used as salvage therapy or second line drug in mucormycosis. Since it has less minimum inhibitory concentration, therefore it has lower blood levels than isavuconazole, and this drug use is limited because of limited experience. Now we can also consider combination therapy, but mostly monotherapy is equally good as combination therapy. In combination therapy, we can give echinocandin in combination with polyene. These include drugs like caspofungin, micafungin and anidulafungin. How these act as antiviral? These down-regulate the virulence of fungus, therefore decreasing the tissue necrosis and decreasing destruction. Standard doses of echinocandin should be used in combination therapy, and retrospective clinical data suggests superior outcomes for rhinoorbital cerebral mucormycosis. Combination of polyene and azole like posaconazole and isavuconazole can also be used. It has a favorable toxicity profile, but limited data is available. Triple therapy including polyenes, echinocandins and azole can also be used, and it has maximal aggressiveness, but limited efficacy data is available. So the drug of choice is liposomal amphotericin B, and the dose is 5 to 10 mg per kg OD dose. Now the other therapy which can be used for mucormycosis involve recombinant cytokines, giving recombinant cytokines to the patient, and neutrophil transfusion. Since there is defective phagocytic function, neutrophil transfusion is theoretically suggested a treatment, but role is not established till now. Continuation of antifungal should be done till the resolution of signs and symptoms. We can taper the dose gradually with daily therapy shifted to thrice weekly lipid polyene doses and then to twice weekly doses. When we consider the prognosis of mucormycosis has substantially improved with aggressive antifungal therapy, and it mainly depends on patient's predisposing condition.